I asked Dan Artosis a question about IdrA on his stream, and here's what he said.
Remember when IdrA beat MVP at the peak of his powers on steps in GSL round of 16? I don't remember. Like, I remember IdrA was the best Zerg in the world for a little bit. Before Root Dealer popped up. It's funny, because the Koreans were actually calling him Zerg with 2 Z's, which is like 4th race type thing. And then they just gave that title to Fruit Dealer after Fruit Dealer came and wrecked the first GSL. But IdrA was actually called it by the Koreans before him.
So if we think about that time period in StarCraft 2, it's the very beginning of Wings of Liberty. And IdrA's reputation was so high because let's think about his career as a Brood War player. He was definitively the best foreigner. And whenever we think about him being the best foreigner, there were guys like Mondragon, Rhett, Jinro, aka Frozen Arbiter, Artosis himself. Those names are out there, certainly Noni comes to mind. But the reason that IdrA was considered the best was in an interview in 2010, Dan Artosis pointed out that he had the highest win rate against foreigner players from that 2009 to 2010 era. Furthermore, and this is the more important part, that's just sort of a sidebar of why he was like better than the other foreigners, but the real reason why he was considered the best was because he was one of the only guys that went to Korea long term and stuck it out as a full-time pro gamer. Other guys, Tasteless, who of course is Artosis' casting partner and a Protoss player, an aggressive Protoss player. And you guys know what I really mean when I say aggressive Protoss player. He's building cannons in your natural, smoking 2 cigarettes at once. Nick Tasteless plot. Great guy. We can see Greg IdrA Fields here at the bottom. I love the fact that at the top he's using a CJ IdrA tag. He's playing against a Chinese player who we're just going to call the Terran. Maybe Womp, maybe not, who cares? It's just a Terran player. But the backstory of this tournament is hilarious. If you don't know what CJ IdrA is, CJ Entus is one of the longest running Korean teams ever. Top in Brood War team. Relevant in League of Legends too for a while, if anyone cares about that. No one really does, because StarCraft is the best esport and the one that matters the most, unparalleled. But CJ Entus, some of the more casual fans might know them from that. It's the same team. It's of course a Korean team based in Korea. IdrA won this tournament in the foreigner scene that allowed him to get on the East Row team, and then eventually he got into CJ Entus. So when you see the CJ IdrA tag, it's to say that it's like it's in the Korea IdrA era definitively, but it's before he joined EG in the early part of StarCraft 2. So this is in the early days of StarCraft 2. Now some of the more advanced viewers might have seen the map and deduced that already, because this is a little catastrophe, an absolute abhorrent disgrace for Zerg called Desert Oasis. If you look at the 2 spawning positions, it's like they're bizarrely kind of in the middle. The air rush distance is super short. There's 3 Zelnaga towers. You can tell that this is insanely old, not just by the CJ IdrA tag and some of how like the production in the unit, like the thumbnails of the control groups, pardon me, and stuff like that looks. But even as far as the maps, like Desert Oasis, it's absolutely horrible. And they had no idea what they were doing in the early days of StarCraft 2. Blizzard was just absolutely jobbing it. And the natural of this map is the most wide open natural in StarCraft. Now, there is a choke sort of between the high ground of your natural in general, but the natural itself has another huge main directly beneath your spawn. And it's a huge area. It's ridiculous. And then there's a gold that's your natural third. And then the 12 o'clock base that you see that's sort of behind you has a high ground over it. And then the corners are islands. So if you don't know, islands are bad for Zerg because it's like a huge commitment to get up to layer and drop and speed. It's a ridiculous commitment versus just floating a CC or dropping an SCV. Obviously floating is like just making the CC in your manning and floating it is really easy. But it's also easier to do it because you're going to get the medevac. It's also easier for Protoss to do it than Zerg, but distinctly it's easiest for Terran. IdrA going Roach, Blue Flame Hellion the choice here. Blue Flame Hellion makes a lot of sense because it's a really open map. But I gotta get to the background of this story because it's hilarious. And note that IdrA playing on his Limper ID, an ID that he would use in Korea, and that's based on one of his favorite book series, the name of which I've forgotten, and a lot of his VODs are gone. So if you know the name of the book series that the Limper ID is from, I'd love to see it down in the comments. IdrA going Roach, which is very safe and will allow him to apply a lot of pressure. Remember, this is the early Wings of Liberty days. Zerg is way more fragile, the Overlord slower. The Queen has lower range, the Roach has lower range. You guys have heard a lot of this stuff before. This is a really unique video and a really esoteric VOD. I want to get to the story and the background in this video. We see a really weird, antiquated build. This is one factory Blue Flame Hellion where you're making Hellions one at a time. And he's expanding off of this too, and he's going Starport, presumably, for Banshee. This is very greedy. I say presumably. It's from 2010. Who the hell knows what he's going to do? But let's just think about the idea of, okay, he's seen some Roaches. Banshee would make sense. Banshee would be how you could sort of pump the brakes on the aggression. So what is the tournament? This is a nationalistic WCS, or excuse me, as we see Roaches coming in here for the defense. WCG, pardon me. That was quite the slip there. Only a few of y'all will get that, so I'll leave it in. But WCG, the nationalistic tournament, where they sent the best players in the world from certain regions. And the tournament organizers came to the Godfather of StarCraft, the man that started the video for us verbally, Dan Artosis. And they said, Artosis, we're doing a WCG regional style tournament as IdrA is getting Roachborough, Carapace, and he's trying to scout. And Artosis says, really? And they go, yeah, we're gonna invite like the best 3 players. We're gonna do like Team Europe, Team America. No, it was Team 4. It was like Team Europe and America, basically Team White Guy, and then like Team Korea and then Team China, because it was an event out of China. So it was like Team Foreigner, and then China had their own scene because it was a Chinese event, and then like the God Korean team. Remember, this is on the back end of the best esport ever made. As we see the Hellions cleaned up, Brood War defined and created esports. So whenever StarCraft 2 came out, note the Viking thumbnail there coming out, they're inlanded because it's production. It's still hilarious. Double Viking. Reactored Starport. As we see Hellions diving in here. And you could just get chanced a lot easier as Zerg in this era. Remember, if you can't make the Queen as much because it has lower range for ground defense and air defense, you're just way more flimsy. Also, the maps are more jokish. The spine doesn't wall. You've heard this all before from me if you haven't checked my other videos. Because I don't want to distract myself. You guys know how I can get prattling on about stuff like that. So, the tournament organizers come to Artosis and pitch this idea to him. And Dan Artosis, the hero of American StarCraft, he had slept in enough closets and eaten enough hard-boiled eggs by this point to have a little bit of hustle. And when the tournament organizers came to him, when they pitched this idea, and they were talking about like, yeah, you know, the names that you're going to have on Team Korea's, it's sort of obvious, but like Team China's our guys. But like Team America, you know, we're thinking like maybe Rhett, the homie White Raw, who everybody likes. And you know what Dan did? He said, let me tell you guys about Micro Media, and he sold them on his own clan. That's right. And you know, our boy Artosis, he had an ace up his sleeve, like the late great Jeff in Control Robinson, rest in peace, I still miss him. But old Archmaid Danny had an ace up his sleeve, and it was the Macro Machine, his prodigy, Greg IdrA Fields. And you know, look at the yellow marker on the thumbnail there to indicate how many units are in it. That's how old this is. If you've watched enough games, you'll note this stuff to be abnormal, and it will also be amusing to you. Note like the stim pack thumbnail too, just ancient era. Remember, on the back of Brood War, everybody wanted to get a little something of the StarCraft 2 scene. So there were a ton of tournaments like this, as there should have been. Invite stuff. So for guys like IdrA, who had slaved away in the Korean team houses, and really he had put it on the line longer than anyone else, this was a huge respite to be able to be invited to stuff like this. So old Archmage Danny, he plays his ace up his sleeve. He goes, why would you fly all those guys out from Europe, pay like the $2,000 in travel, because the flight from Korea, which is where Tasteless, Artosis, and IdrA were at the time, to China is way, way cheaper than freaking the Ukraine, you know. It's way shorter distance. As we see an attack occurring here at the third. And genius Artosis tells him, I'm going to save you $3,000 here. I'm going to save you like a ton of the prize pool, and you're going to get the best player in the world. Because remember, we're coming off of the back of Brood War, and you guys just saw the clip of what the Korean players themselves thought about IdrA. Remember, Archmage Danny was on the cutting edge of the Korean scene. He was living over there, right? So no one would know better than him. He was literally interviewing the Korean team houses and doing tours. You cannot say, or you can say, like nobody, what I meant to say, nobody had a better pulse on the Korean scene from a foreigner standpoint than Artosis. Like Artosis was the boots on the ground guy. I mean, he's literally the GSL caster. That's why they call him, he's the Godfather of StarCraft. So essentially, if you're a StarCraft fan, whatever Artosis says goes. So Artosis talking to the tournament organizers were like, why would you pay all that money for White Raw and like Ret? Like, they're god tier players and everybody likes them, but you know, like Artosis knows how good IdrA is and believes in his own ability as well. Remember at the back end of Brood War and beginning of like the Wings beta time, Artosis was like, I can't wait to get back into pro gaming. He was initially promised a PC by the Korean team that he lived with, and he never got it, so his Brood War skills fell off, which was tragic. So he really wanted to be a full-time pro gamer again when StarCraft 2 came out. Unfortunately, he really didn't have a legitimate chance to do this due to how much they were having him cast. The GSL was crazy as far as how much it was coming on. It was just not, they were literally doing like a season a month, and they were having him do like Code B. It was just crazy. They were really overworking him. But the point is he really didn't have time to practice. You really have to have time to practice and keep your skills sharp. Though ultimately, like Artosis was super excited for StarCraft 2 and saw himself as a legitimate pro gamer right at the very, very beginning of Wings and at the beta time. It wasn't until like 2011 when he got ground down by work where it was more of like, okay, like I'm literally going to a freaking weekend event every weekend, jet lag to hell, have a family, like he's, and like doing god tier casting every like time. That's what you have to remember about Artosis, is he's so good at, like he never took a day off. He was so good in terms of like his consistency. As we see the third dying there, remember no Lurker, no Ravager at this time. But Artosis sold him on the media package. He said, I got the best player in the world as my team ace, and he's like me, but his macro is better, and he's even more of a smartass. And I've also got Tasteless. And you know what's great about Tasteless is they see him light up another heater like Keith Hernandez. Artosis says, my boy Nick over there, look, if we play Team Korea and bomb out in the first round, which we won't, but if we do, because I know you guys are kind of just thinking like we're here for the viewership, we'll cast this for the English stream. And they said, okay, fuck it. I just ad-libbed that. That wasn't part of the story, but like, you know, that was the tongue-in-cheek sell Artosis gave him, is my like sort of headcanon. So he agreed, and I swear to you, Team America, IdrA and Artosis smashed Team Korea. As we see IdrA smashing through this army, we saw him go a very, very early StarCraft 2, like make a few infestors and wait for them to pool energy before, like, you gotta understand that it took Zergs until 2012 to realize you were supposed to wait until 31 seconds on the pathogen glands to start the infestors. If you don't know, that's like the infestors will pop a second after the upgrade finishes, so they'll have the energy for a fungal, which is the crux of the issue, right? Whereas when they came out for IdrA, they're like, infested Terran had to be used in a way more utility-focused way in this era. Grotesquely, like without, like the Ravager now I think makes Zerg like too good defensively, and is sort of a hokey unit. But at the time, like Zerg had to deal with a bunch of terrible maps as IdrA's letting up a huge drop. So anyway, IdrA plays this match. Artosis finesses them to this tournament. and they destroy Team Korea in the first round with like the Macro Machine playing a prominent part of it as you see him dropping into the main. Is IdrA the best player in the world at this time? And if we think about what era this actually was in StarCraft history, this is on like, this is like the golden era. If you think about like 08, 09, 2010, Brood War is like solidly in its peak, and it's like very, very advanced strategically. IdrA is at the peak of his powers in that era as we see a GG there, and IdrA wins it hilariously. So just some closing thoughts here. You might be thinking, so what ended up happening at the tournament? Surely like Team America won if they beat freaking Team Korea, and all they had to do is beat like, a couple Chinese guys who were pretty solid, but not like a Korean heavy hitter that you're a big name guy that is one of the best players in the world, right? If you're playing in a StarCraft tournament and you beat Team Korea, you're feeling really good. It's like you're not worried about what's left. Especially in this era, you have to remember, like with IdrA at the peak of his powers, like America was very, very strong. So what ended up happening? The Chinese players could hear the casters, and the freaking Chinese players were able to win because they could hear what was going on in the game and could hear the commentators. So Team America would end up getting second. Hope you guys enjoyed. Sub for more.